Hey everybody, welcome back to Planet Coaster. And in this video I'm starting work on the Dutch area, which is very unexpected and not really according to planning, and I'll talk a bit about why I'm doing it this way. Basically my original plan was to start work on the Scandinavian area, get some Norwegian houses in there and an RMC wooden coaster. But I tried to do it and I tried to make the RMC, actually got the layout done and tried some supporting stuff. At least see and look if I could do that kind of thing, but it really just turned out into a disaster. At least I wasn't really confident in it enough that I could actually make it into an area. So that's one reason why I felt it would be better to start off with the Dutch area. And another reason is that I still have a very tight deadline and I'm not really sure if I'm gonna make it. I talked about it a bit in the last video, but I didn't actually state what the deadline was. So I'll just get back to that very quickly. The 23rd of August is when Alpha 3 comes out, and by that time I want this park to be finished so I can start a new park in Alpha 3. And the problem with that is that it's, well, it's pretty close as a date, but also I'm going to Berlin for a week in a couple of days, which means that I don't really have all that much time to actually work on it. And I do want it to be finished. I don't wanna, like, end up with an unfinished park, so rather than just see where I end up, I do wanna stay ahead a bit and make sure that I can actually finish the park, just maybe downscale it. And why I'm working on the Dutch area first for that reason is that I feel it connects a bit better to the first area. Like, if all else fails and I don't have enough time left to start work on the Scandinavian area, I can always just close up what was going to be the entrance to that part of the park and just leave it as a Dutch/German park theme. And that should work in the end, and I wasn't just as confident in the Scandinavian theme working in that same way, so that's why I wanted to start on the Dutch theme. Anyway, to talk about what I actually want to do with this theme, I wanted to get a somewhat special coaster in here, since it's one that I haven't seen anyone build before, and it certainly isn't the usage that you're supposed to have with this kind of coaster in the game. Basically, I want to make a B&M family invert. Or a family suspended coaster, I should say, which is not even a coaster type per se. B&M has only made one family suspended coaster, and it is technically just the same model as a Vekoma coaster, except the Chinese park just asked B&M to make that Vekoma coaster. So it isn't really any kind of coaster type that you can really go out and make. But I wanted to have a Vekoma family suspended coaster in this park, since I just really like those myself, and especially right now you see many of the smaller parks add Vekoma suspended coasters. I think a really good example lately has been Paulton's Park, which added a very beautiful, well-themed Vekoma family suspended. And they're just very cheap, but nicely themable, and yeah, they allow for a lot of path interaction as well. So they're really a pretty good addition to a small park like the one that I'm making here, and that's why I felt it would really be a great addition for this one. Except, obviously, for in-game limitations, I'm gonna have to go for a B&M family suspended coaster, since there aren't any Vekoma coasters in the game yet. And the Jovanola cars, to be honest, they are two-seater trains, just like suspended coaster trains. And they do kind of look like them, so I think this looks just about close enough to a real Vekoma family coaster. Or B&M family coaster, I should say. Layout-wise, it's a bit of a mix between the standard Vekoma 400 meter model of this coaster, which is pretty much off the shelf and built in many parks, and a few elements from Orkanen, which is a really cool Vekoma family suspended, which is a custom model, and I more or less took the first and the last part of the ride from Orkanen with that sort of horseshoe element, and the final sort of airtime hill before you curve into the station, and this middle part here with the two helixes is basically taken out of, well, the standard 400 meter model, which does have these two helixes, and one very interesting thing that I really wanted to mess around with, custom supports. Because these things have helix supports with one big pole in the middle and just girders on the side that hold up the tracks, which are interesting for a number of reasons. It obviously allows for a lot of paths to be run underneath them instead of this big mess of supports, which basically blocks the entire view. So just a really nice way to get a nice park planning into this area and set it up quite open and spaced out and have the coaster run over the path. But also, I haven't really messed around with custom supports in this game yet. since I didn't really think it would be possible given the pieces that we have in the game at the moment. But these helix supports are actually quite feasible, and sort of tried making them, and that sort of first test worked out pretty well. And then I pretty much was like, we're gonna do this, because it seemed like a lot of fun to do, and could actually work out pretty well in this game. Just one big, sort of fat, round support in the middle, and the girders on the side. The one small issue with it though, is that the actual supports that hold up the coaster tracks are made out of little lights, since that was the only object of this color and size that I could really use to make the shape of these supports as close to reality as they can be. But you know, these are hundreds of little lights that are all facing toward those supports, so in nighttime these supports do end up looking like giant strobes, which looks very weird to say the least, and that's a bit of a small complication here. But to be honest, most of the time you're gonna look at these things in daytime anyway, and if I do record some nighttime shots, I can always ignore them in the nighttime shots and try not to have the camera point toward them. So that's really the only sort of issue with these supports. Also, realistically, the supports that hold up the track would be round, and they're square here, but they are just about the same size and the same shape. So yeah, I'm quite happy with how these supports turn out, especially because they're such a visual iconic element of these kinds of roller coasters that really gives them a very unique look. So getting those right was quite important here. Now on to the second part of this video then. I'm pretty much working on the station for the rest of this video and not even finishing it. It turned out to be like one of the most time-consuming things in a while. Because this isn't actually the first station, it's the second one. I first tried making a station kind of like a train station, inspired by many train stations in the Netherlands, but it ended up being really bulky and big and not looking really that great. And really unhappy about the results, so I decided to remove that entire thing and start all over again, and that's basically what you're seeing here. And it's going to be a sort of rural station. A lot of inspiration from Dutch farms. And I know that sounds really vague, but it really turned out to be quite vague as well. There isn't really any kind of real building that actually looks like this. There isn't really any kind of reference that I used for this, just looking at a number of farms and taking some elements from them. And the final building perhaps isn't even that sort of typically Dutch in a sense, at least if you look at it shape-wise. It's just what I pretty much figured would look good in the end. And so while I'm quite happy with how it turned out, it is not necessarily the most Dutch thing ever, and we might as well call it some theme park Dutch, because I did want to take quite a few liberties with it. So how it's made, basically, is we've got the one sort of main thing that sticks out from the front, and while it doesn't really look like much, it's actually one of the most important parts of the building, I think. It's like the one part of the building which is actually facade, which actually faces forward, and it's the part of the building that you actually look straight onto if you enter this area. So as soon as you enter the area, sort of go underneath some sort of, I don't know, gates. I'm not sure if I'm gonna do that kind of thing. But if you really come into the area, this is like the thing that you see like straight ahead, which is pretty much going to make the station a pretty big weenie of the area. And having that sort of forward-facing facade on the front of it gives it a bit of a quality which makes it a scene setter almost, I think, for the plaza in front of it. It's like what's going to make the entire look of the plaza, or more or less make or break the entire look of this plaza, because it's not going to have too many buildings around it. And especially if you look at this from the entrance, this is the only building that you see around the plaza, so it's really going to make up for quite a lot of the look of the plaza itself. Not to mention that from many of the angles that you can look at the coaster from, you'll also see a bit of the station, and it's mostly on the right side, looking from the front of it, which is also why I wanted to get that bit on the right side of the station to stick out to the front. The rest of the station though is just very heavily inspired by farmhouses in the Netherlands, just with a bunch of things sticking out and with some extra decorations, as a sort of round roof on the top with a lot of woodwork to basically give it a frame to keep up the roof. And yeah, that's just more or less the basic makeup, with a bunch of different roofs on different heights and different shapes on the rest of the station. but that's basically how it works. I'm copying the frame around here, which I always like to do before I actually place the roof, so that you don't actually end up having to build a frame where you can't really see it, which was my biggest mistake with doing the station for the junior coaster. I am still not sure what I've done with that station, and I still have to go back in time to actually repair that thing and make sure that it looks better than what it does at the moment. But anyway, place the roof over it, and that should be more or less that part of the station finished. Then on both sides, to sort of give it that look that the middle of the station is a little bit taller than the sides, and it sort of runs down on the sides, I wanted some very low roofs and very gentle roofs, not as steep as the roofs in the middle on the sides, that don't really draw any attention but just add a bit of width to the station as well. Of course, one of the challenges here too was the fact that the station platform that you get from the game itself is this very big rectangle, and rectangular buildings don't really work out that well, so I had to do something with this to at least give it a bit of a less rectangular and blocky shape to the station building, without actually taking out the base shape of it too. And skipping ahead in the time-lapse a little bit, I still had the back of the station which was just uncovered, and I didn't want to leave it uncovered, so there's just a very quick, simple, flat roof on the back. I do have to say about this station, it is really a station that's meant to be looked at from the front, and I didn't really put any effort in making it look good whatsoever from the back of the building, which, to be honest, I'm not usually a very big fan of doing. And even at the end of this episode, I haven't even finished the back of this station. But in the end, the front is definitely what's most important about this station, and also since this coaster really hugs the park border and there really isn't anything at the back of the station, I pretty much just left that very empty and boring, and there's nothing interesting to really look at over there. Now, a few things that I also wanted to mess with a bit to at least make this look a little bit more Dutch, because for a while I was struggling to sort of get ideas on how to make things look Dutch without resorting to the very obvious things of, you know, making the standard Dutch sort of gables. Like, anyone's gonna recognize an Amsterdam kind of gable as a Dutch building, but when it comes to like farm buildings and the more common just townhouses, there aren't really any larger distinguishing features that are as obvious as on many Dutch gables. Like, it's a lot more in just the details of it and the textures of it, which is one reason why I also wanted to use as much brick and as much of the red roof as I could here. And another thing which I kind of tried to do everywhere is get these trims in around the roof to at least give it a bit more of a clean look than the very rustic sort of alpine look that I had going in the other section of the park. So that's why I more or less tried over there. I'm still not really sure if that actually failed or won over there, but well, I guess that was the idea behind it. Now, what I was quite happy with though is the front of the building, which is really important. I ended up spending a lot of time on these windows alone compared to a lot of the rest of the building, since it is what a lot of the focus on the building itself will be about, since it's the only like part of the building that actually comes forward as sort of speaks to the looker almost. And yeah, it's like these windows are the only distinguishing building features of the building, because there aren't any other parts where I can add windows or doors or anything like this, which is why I wanted to put extra care into these. Now, the top building is just a very simple sort of attic. I mean, the top window is just a very simple window, but this bottom one, I at least wanted to add a bit more detail into it. So the basic window is kind of like many of the Dutch windows, very large wide frame around it, and many sort of parts within the window itself as well. And I wanted to get some extra shutters on the side. There aren't any shutters in the game yet, and I didn't want to resort to just using some very simple planks to make the shutters. And what I really wanted to do is try those red-white shutters that you see on many Dutch buildings, which ended up working, yeah, pretty alright actually, with these sign pieces and everything. It's probably a hell to render for my PC, but I'm quite happy with how these turn out in the end. I referenced a farmhouse for this though. For this bottom window is pretty much a carbon copy of that, except for the shutters, which there are many different variations of. But one thing that, and I'm not really a shutter expert, but one thing which I find on many Dutch buildings is that they have these red white shutters with either an X pattern or a sort of diagonal pattern like this. So that's one of the things that I really want to try and get into this area as much as I can, because it's what should hopefully set these buildings apart from other but very similar European architecture styles. Same goes for the little arch with the small white stones on top of it as well, which is a thing that you see on many Dutch buildings, especially some which have those little white stones pretty much riddled everywhere, from cornerstones to pillars to doors, and that's one thing that I wanted to get in here as well. Now the rest of this is basically a whole lot of detailing, since how I do always like to make the buildings is just make sure that you get like the largest like big shapes in first and then get to the small details last. So most of this is basically just placing down fences and placing down all sorts of little scenery items to add some foliage, to add some small details, and to add a bit of a liveliness. That's not even a word. A bit of liveliness, that will do, to the building, and basically make sure that it doesn't look as boring as it does at the moment. I also thought for quite a while here that I could add a small round sort of section which comes out at the front of the building over here, but that didn't really end up working. So in the end I just went for a straight version like this, and that's just a very sort of simple thing that comes out. Just one thing that I tried to do to at least make this building look a little bit less blocky and a little bit less square, because when it comes to stations, at least heavily themed stations, I always want to avoid those rectangles. So at least I suppose this makes sure that the station isn't technically 100% a rectangle. Now with all that in, I still wasn't really confident about the look of this building, and decided I actually want to add a few white trims on the bottoms of the roofs just to give it a bit more extra contrast, because like all of the wood and the brick walls and everything all have almost the same shade of brown, and it was looking really dark. So especially in a case like this, I figured it might be nice to get some very light accents in, as light as I really can, to at least contrast that a bit and make sure that the shape of the building comes out a bit more, and that where the wall ends and where the roof begins is a bit more clear, and not that it's just this big sort of shady dark transition. And one other thing that I also wanted to add on the base, which pretty much there isn't any reference for, just random decorations, because I was looking at the base and it was just looking very, well, one big brick wall, and I didn't want to add any windows to the base since that didn't really seem to make any sense, especially with it being this close to the ground, the foundation of the building I should call it. So I wanted to add that golden trim to it, to at least add a bit more different color to the building as well. I'm not really sure if this would really be that common of a building feature in any way, but I do think it helps to bring out the station a bit more. And I also wanted to get rid of these pesky little borders on the paths, because you get them basically everywhere. I don't want to remove them everywhere, but especially around the station here, I wanted to get a very clean look around the entire thing. So that's why I wanted to get these borders in. Also something that I really should say about this area, which is quite important that you'll see coming back here, is that this is supposedly a pretty new addition to the park. Like the core of the park is the German area, and it just recently expanded into a Dutch area, and perhaps at some point in the future Scandinavian area, and for that reason I want to keep it a bit more spaced out, not have any large trees, and just have very small bushes and trees in most places that look like they were very recently planted. And that's why I ended up keeping this quite empty and not adding any large shrubbery, just a small hedge next to the path, a couple of bushes, and very small trees that look like they're still more or less growing in front of it instead of anything else. If anything, it's pretty much ripped off from the way that the bushes were planted along Baron 1898 in the Efteling, which for the rest of the look in this area might become a bit of a inspiration. I'm not really sure yet, we'll see how that goes. But it's a really cool coaster anyway, and one that I figured I could take some inspiration from, but I didn't really end up doing it. It has a mining theme, and I do want to go for a more general Dutch small town sort of feeling to this area. But it's really cool otherwise. And last but not least, adding to the building some very small separate scenery items. Some of the planters and some of the barrels and some of that other stuff which I don't even know why it's there or what it's supposed to be, but it just adds some extra thing to look at and make sure that not too many places in the buildings are empty. And obviously, since this is a new area, I want to see and experiment with a few more path elements as well. I do want to keep the benches and litter bins from the other area probably, but some new lights seemed like they were pretty much overdue, so I added a few of those. It's a pretty simple light, and I most likely won't use it throughout the entire area, but in front of the station it seems pretty nice. Anyway, that's it for the time-lapse part today. I'm gonna give it over to my real-time self here. So this is what the area looks like right now. I am sorry about the frame rates. I might actually mention that as one more reason to just leave it as a Dutch area at some point in the future. But anyway, to get to the point, one thing that I wanted to start off with is the view as you come into the area. There's going to be a restaurant over here, which is that bit of planning with the random blocks, which might seem very ugly and strange at the moment, but I'll get to that at some point in the future. And basically this is the entrance path from which you'll really enter and see the rest of the area, where you have the station in front of it, and the helix part should be pretty visible as well, since it's not just the coaster itself, it's a pretty important part of the scenery over here too. And this is basically what the station looks like from a couple of, well, angles, and with like a few small changes to it that I did off screen. But aside from that, it's pretty much the same as it was in the time-lapse, and here's how the coaster rides. It's not that fast of a coaster, and it is supposed to be a family coaster, so it definitely won't be that fast. The banking is a bit strange on it as well. Not the way I would usually want to do it, but the issue with it is that in real life these would have swinging cars, and they would just kind of swing from side to side in these different curves, and that's why I added a few more banking degrees to it, which don't normally look that good, especially on this hill where I wanted it to swing to the other side over here. Had to add a bit more banking, which you wouldn't normally see, just to make sure that it swings a bit, because the in-game car doesn't swing at all. I would really like to see some swinging cars at some point in the future though. But yeah, that's the coaster at the moment. Now as for my future plans, I am not really too sure what I want to do. I obviously want to finish this area with a quick bit of foliage, and finish the back of the station and add a bit of scenery around the queue. But aside from that, there's still a restaurant to be finished over here. There might be a building over here which could serve as a control room for the octopus ride, as well as some sort of scenery thing. Aside from that though, I'm most likely going to end up just placing foliage over here to block out the German area. And I'm gonna flatten this out, most likely. I was thinking for quite a while that I wanted to make this flat this way so I could build some buildings on it. But on second thought, I want to keep this area as flat as I can. There's obviously a very slight hill that the park is built on, so I can't keep it 100% flat. But since the Netherlands is flat, and I do want to stick as closely as I can to that theme, I'm probably gonna end up just bulldozing this stupid hill over here, and just make it flat all the way, and add some buildings over here. Current plan is just to have some facades over here, which is gonna be like the main string of buildings in the area, and leave some room, some very small space over here for a flat ride, and possibly a transition into the Scandinavian area that would be planned here. But yeah, we'll see if that's gonna happen at some point in the future. Anyway, that's what I've done today, and that's what I'm gonna do in the future. So thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you guys next time.